Asthmatic black girl denied oxygen mid-flight until twin sisters call to dad grounds all flights. But what happened in those 11 minutes before that call, before the emergency landing, before anyone with power intervened, reveals a truth about racism in American aviation that will make your blood run cold. You people always fake medical emergencies to get special treatment. The flight attendant's voice was cold, dismissive, final. She looked down at 12-year-old Kayla Thompson gasping for air in seat 23C and didn't see a child in respiratory distress. She saw a problem. An inconvenience. A black girl she assumed was lying. The words hit Kayla's twin sister Kenya like a slap across the face. They were 37,000 feet over Nebraska on United Flight 2156 from Detroit to Denver, trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky while her sister's lips were turning blue, while Kayla's chest heaved with the effort of trying to breathe through airways that were closing, while passengers around them stared and recorded but nobody moved to help. Kenya had asked politely 3 times for oxygen, had explained that Kayla's inhaler was empty, had begged with tears streaming down her face. And this flight attendant, this white woman with her perfectly pressed uniform and her cold eyes, had called them liars. Here's what people don't understand. Racism didn't die with segregation. It didn't disappear with civil rights laws. It evolved. It got smarter. It learned to hide behind policies and procedures and professional language. And sometimes, like today in 2024, it became something even more dangerous than it was in the 1960s. It became medical neglect disguised as protocol. It became a flight attendant looking at a dying child and deciding her blackness made her symptoms suspect. Her race made her emergency fake. Her brown skin made her suffering a performance for attention. Before we continue with the story, welcome to Hyper Racism Channel, where we expose the truth about racial discrimination and profiling of black people in America, truths the airline industry would rather keep hidden. They don't want us to reach a wide audience, but we're not backing down. Let's make sure the truth gets out. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can reach millions with the facts they've tried to bury. Thanks for hitting that subscribe button and supporting our channel. Kayla Thompson had experienced racism before. Store clerks followed her and Kayla around like they were thieves. Teachers assumed they needed extra help because black girls couldn't possibly be smart. Security guards watching them too closely in nice neighborhoods. At 12 years old, she'd already accumulated a lifetime of small cuts from racism's blade. But this? Watching her twin sister suffocate while an adult with the power to help refused because she didn't believe black children deserved that help? This was different. This wasn't a microaggression. This was attempted murder wrapped in a smile and a uniform. Please, Kenya sobbed, her small hands gripping the flight attendant's arm. My sister can't breathe. She needs oxygen. She's going to die. Please help us. The flight attendant pulled her arm away like Kenya's touch had contaminated her. If your sister is really having a medical emergency, we have protocols. But I'm not going to waste oxygen on dramatics. Now sit down before I have the captain remove both of you from this flight. Around them, passengers in rows 22 through 25 watched this confrontation unfold. A businessman had his phone out, recording every gasping breath Kayla took, every desperate plea Kenya made, but his mouth stayed firmly shut. A middle-aged couple whispered to each other, looking uncomfortable, but they didn't intervene. An elderly woman shook her head sadly but said nothing. They all saw a child dying. They all heard the refusal of medical care. And not one of them had the courage to stand up and demand that the flight attendant do her job. Kayla's breathing got worse. Her fingernails were turning purple. Her eyes were starting to roll back. If you believe no child should be denied life-saving medical care because of their skin color, keep watching. If you think racism on airplanes can't literally kill people, you need to see what happens in the next 9 minutes. And if you've ever been dismissed by medical professionals who didn't believe your pain was real because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. This story doesn't end the way you think. What this 12-year-old girl does next will ground every flight in American airspace. But to understand how 2 12-year-old black girls ended up trapped at 37,000 feet with one of them suffocating while a flight attendant refused to help, We need to go back 9 hours to that morning in Detroit when everything still felt like Christmas magic was possible. Kayla and Kayla Thompson were identical twins who'd been inseparable since birth. Same dark brown eyes. Same bright smiles. Same love of science and basketball and terrible jokes that made their father groan. They were 7th graders at Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, both on the honor roll, both in advanced math, both dreaming of becoming doctors someday. The only real difference between them was that Kayla had asthma. Severe asthma that required daily medication, emergency inhalers kept in every bag and pocket, and careful monitoring of triggers like cold air, exercise, and stress. Their parents, Michael and Sandra Thompson, had raised them to be confident, articulate, proud black girls who understood their history and their worth. Michael worked in aviation safety management for the FAA, traveling frequently for inspections and policy meetings. Sandra was an emergency room nurse who'd taught her daughters basic medical knowledge, how to advocate for themselves, how to recognize when a situation was truly dangerous. The twins had been taught to be polite but firm, to respect authority but question injustice, to take care of each other above all else. This Christmas trip to Denver was special. Their Aunt Rebecca, Sandra's younger sister, had just bought her first house and wanted her nieces there for the holidays. It was supposed to be an adventure. 2 weeks of skiing, hot chocolate, opening presents in a new place, being treated like the young women they were becoming instead of little kids. Their parents had carefully prepared them, made sure Kayla had 3 full inhalers plus her backup medication, reviewed emergency protocols, reminded them to stay together, called the airline to note Kayla's medical condition on their reservation. That morning, Sandra had made their favorite breakfast while going over the rules one final time. Keep your inhalers in your carry-on, not checked luggage. If you have any breathing trouble, tell the flight attendants immediately. Stay hydrated. Don't be afraid to speak up if something's wrong. The girls had listened, nodded, and promised to be careful. They'd been flying since they were babies. They knew the routine. At Detroit Metropolitan Airport, everything had gone smoothly. Check-in took 5 minutes. The gate agent had been friendly, even making a joke about twins confusing people. Security was easy. TSA agents were professional and quick. At Gate B12, the girls had sat together eating snacks, FaceTiming with friends, showing off their matching Christmas sweaters their grandmother had sent. Other travelers smiled at them. A little boy asked if they were twins and they laughed and said yes. The world felt safe. Normal. Exciting. Boarding United Flight 2156 had been uneventful. They'd walked down the jetway holding their small rolling bags, found their seats in row 23, economy section but aisle and middle so they could sit together. Kenya took the aisle, Kayla the middle. The window seat was empty, a small blessing that gave them extra space. They'd stowed their bags, buckled in, texted their parents a selfie with the caption "On our way to Colorado." The plane was a Boeing 737, fairly new, clean enough. The seats were cramped like economy always was, but tolerable. Around them, passengers settled in with the usual pre-flight chaos. A businessman in row 22 was already on his laptop, ignoring everyone. A young family with a toddler struggled with car seats in row 21. College students with headphones filled rows 24 and 25. The cabin filled with the sounds of people getting comfortable, overhead bins slamming, the hum of passengers ready for departure. Most of the flight crew had been pleasant. A young male flight attendant helped them find space for their bags. An older black flight attendant smiled warmly at them and brought them water without being asked, a small kindness that made Kenya think everything would be fine. But then she appeared. The flight attendant who would change everything. White woman, maybe late 40s, blonde hair pulled back tight, her smile never reaching her eyes. She'd walked past the twins during boarding and something had shifted in her expression when she saw them. A flicker of something cold, dismissive, judgmental. When Kenya had politely asked for an extra blanket because Kayla got cold easily, the flight attendant's response had been sharp. "We only have enough blankets for passengers who need them. You seem fine to me." The tone was wrong. The implication clear. Kenya had felt it immediately, that familiar prickle of being judged, being seen as less than, being treated differently. But she'd smiled politely and said okay, Thank you anyway, the way her parents had taught her to de-escalate situations with people in authority. The plane had taken off smoothly. The twins had looked out the window as Detroit disappeared below them, excited about Denver, about Christmas, about 2 weeks of fun with their aunt. For the first hour, everything was fine. Kayla took out her book. Kenya listened to music. They shared snacks. Just two black girls on a plane, living their lives, bothering nobody. Then, somewhere over Illinois, Kayla had started coughing. Not unusual. She coughed sometimes when the cabin air was dry. She'd reached for her inhaler in her backpack under the seat, taken 2 puffs like she'd done 1,000 times before. The coughing had stopped. Crisis averted. Or so they'd thought. But 30 minutes later, the coughing started again. Harder this time. More persistent. Kayla's breathing was getting tight, that familiar wheeze that meant her airways were constricting, that meant she needed more medication. She'd reached for her inhaler again. Pressed it. Nothing came out. She'd shaken it, tried again. Empty. Her backup inhaler, she'd whispered to Kenya, panic starting to creep into her voice. I need my backup. Kenya had immediately pulled Kayla's backpack out, digging through it with shaking hands. Found the second inhaler. Handed it to her sister. Kayla had tried it. Pressed the canister. Nothing. It was empty too. Both inhalers, the ones their mother had checked that morning, the ones that should have been full, were somehow depleted. Later they'd realize Kayla had been using them more than usual the past week, that the stress of finals and excitement about the trip had triggered more attacks, that they should have gotten refills before flying. But in that moment, trapped at 37,000 feet, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Kayla couldn't breathe. And it was getting worse by the second. Kenya had pressed the call button for the flight attendant. And when that cold-faced woman appeared at their row, when Kenya had explained in her most polite, respectful voice that her sister was having an asthma attack and needed help, when she'd asked if there was oxygen or emergency medication on board, that's when everything had fallen apart. That's when the flight attendant had looked at Kayla wheezing and struggling and had made a decision that would nearly cost a child her life. A decision rooted in racism so deep, so insidious, that it valued procedure and suspicion over a black girl's ability to breathe. And that decision was about to turn a routine Christmas flight into a nightmare that would change aviation policy forever. Kayla Thompson knew what an asthma attack looked like. She'd watched her twin sister have dozens of them over their 12 years of life. She knew the signs. The wheezing that sounded like whined through a broken whistle. The way Kayla's shoulders hunched forward trying to force air into lungs that were betraying her. The panic in her eyes when breathing became work instead of automatic. But this attack, at 37,000 feet with empty inhalers and a flight attendant who wouldn't help, was different. This was the worst Kenya had ever seen. Ma'am, Kenya said, pressing the call button for the 3rd time, her voice shaking but trying to stay calm like her mother had taught her. My sister needs supplemental oxygen. She's having a severe asthma attack. Her peak flow is dropping. We need medical assistance right now. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Susan Mitchell, looked down at Kayla with an expression that made Kenya's blood run cold. Not concern. Not urgency. Suspicion. Like Kayla's gasping breaths and blue-tinged lips were a performance instead of a medical emergency. I already told you, Susan said, her voice dripping with impatience. We don't just hand out oxygen because someone asks for it. If your sister was really having a medical emergency, she'd be unconscious by now. This looks like anxiety to me. Maybe if you both calm down, she'd breathe better. She's not anxious, Kenya said, desperation creeping into her voice. She's hypoxic. Look at her fingernails. They're turning blue. That's cyanosis. That means her blood oxygen saturation is dropping below 90%. She needs oxygen or she's going to go into respiratory failure. Susan's eyes narrowed. Oh, so now you're a doctor? You're 12 years old telling me how to do my job? I've been a flight attendant for 15 years and I know the difference between a real emergency and attention-seeking behavior. Kayla tried to speak, tried to tell this woman that she wasn't faking, that she really couldn't breathe, but all that came out was a horrible wheezing gasp that made passengers in nearby rows finally look up from their phones and tablets. Her chest was heaving with the effort of pulling air through airways that were swelling shut. Each breath sounded wet and labored, like she was drowning from the inside. "Please," Kenya begged, tears streaming down her face now. "I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job. I'm trying to save my sister's life. Airlines carry portable oxygen units for medical emergencies. We learned about it in health class. You have oxygen on this plane. Please. She's dying right in front of you." Around them, passengers were starting to pay attention. The businessman in row 22 had stopped typing on his laptop. The young mother in row 21 was watching with growing horror. College students in the rows behind were pulling out their phones, but not to call for help. To record. To document. To be witnesses who would later claim they had no idea it was that serious. A middle-aged white man in row 24 finally spoke up. "Hey, maybe you should check on the kid. She really doesn't look good." Susan whirled on him. "Sir, I'm handling this situation. Unless you're a medical professional, I don't need your input." The man raised his hands in surrender and went quiet. Just like that. One pushback from the flight attendant and his courage evaporated. He went back to his phone, back to being a passive observer, back to choosing his comfort over a child's life. Kenya looked around desperately at all these adults, all these people who could help, who could demand the flight attendant do something, who could override this one woman's deadly indifference. But nobody moved. They watched. They recorded. They whispered to each other about how awful it was. But they didn't act. Kayla's breathing was getting worse. Her lips were now a dusky purple. Her fingernails looked almost black. She was leaning forward in her seat, hands on her knees, using every accessory muscle in her chest and neck trying to force air into lungs that were shutting down. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold cabin air. Her eyes were wide with terror, with the primal fear of suffocation, of feeling your body fail while your mind screamed for oxygen it couldn't get. Kenya grabbed her sister's hand and felt how cold it was, how clammy. Kayla squeezed back weakly, and that small pressure said everything words couldn't. "I'm scared. Help me. Don't let me die." "Susan," Kenya said, her voice breaking completely now. "Please. I'm begging you. My sister has severe asthma. It's in our reservation notes. Our mom called the airline. They know about her condition. We're not making this up. We're not trying to cause problems. She just needs oxygen. Please. Please help us." Susan looked at Kenya's tear-stained face, at Kayla's obvious respiratory distress, at the growing number of passengers who were now watching this confrontation unfold. And she made a choice. The wrong choice. The choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life and change aviation medical protocols forever. "Your sister is breathing fine," Susan said coldly. "She's talking to you, isn't she? If she can talk, she can breathe. I'm not wasting emergency medical equipment on dramatics. Now both of you need to calm down before I call the captain and have you both restrained for disrupting this flight." Kayla tried to protest, tried to tell this woman that she couldn't actually talk, that the gasps Kenya was interpreting as communication were just desperate attempts to get air. But no words came out. Just that horrible wheezing sound that was getting quieter. Not because her breathing was improving. Because she didn't have enough air left to make noise. Kenya felt something break inside her chest. This adult, this person in authority, this flight attendant who was supposed to keep passengers safe, had just threatened to restrain them for having a medical emergency. Had just accused a dying child of being dramatic. Had just chosen policy and suspicion over a 12-year-old black girl's life. "How long until we land?" Kenya asked desperately, looking at the flight tracker on the seatback screen. "Please, just tell me how long." "Hour and 45 minutes to Denver," Susan said, already turning away. "Your sister can manage that long if she stops working herself up. An hour and 45 minutes. Kenya looked at Kayla and knew with absolute certainty that her twin didn't have that long. Kayla's breathing was so labored now that each breath looked like it might be her last. Her eyes were starting to glaze over. The terror was being replaced by something worse. Confusion. Disorientation. The cognitive effects of a brain being starved of oxygen. Around them, passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman in row 23 by the window seat pulled out her phone and started recording. Not to help. Not to call for assistance. Just to document. Just to have content for social media later. just to be able to say she was there when it happened. The businessman in row 22 texted someone, his face troubled, but he didn't stand up, didn't demand action, didn't use his adult authority to override a flight attendant who was clearly making a fatal mistake. The young mother in row 21 whispered to her husband that this was terrible, that someone should do something, but she held her toddler close and stayed in her seat. Afraid to make a scene. Afraid to challenge authority. Afraid that getting involved might somehow put her own child at risk. And the college students behind them kept recording, kept whispering commentary for their videos, kept treating a child's medical crisis like entertainment rather than an emergency that required intervention. Kenya had never felt so alone. So powerless. So desperate. She was 12 years old, trapped on an airplane with her twin sister dying beside her, and every single adult who could help had chosen not to. They'd chosen rules over rescue, comfort over courage, recording over intervening. Kayla's head started to droop forward. Her eyes were closing. The wheezing was getting quieter. And Kayla Thompson realized with horror that she was watching her sister die. Right here in row 23 of United Flight 2156. Surrounded by people. Surrounded by phones recording every moment. Surrounded by witnesses who would later claim they had no idea it was that serious. But they knew. They all knew. They just didn't care enough to act. Kayla, Kenya whispered, shaking her sister gently. Kayla, stay with me. Please. Don't close your eyes. Stay awake. Please. Kayla's eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused and dim. She tried to squeeze Kenya's hand but didn't have the strength. Her breathing was so shallow now it barely moved her chest. And Kayla Thompson made a decision. She couldn't wait for adults to save them. She couldn't count on these passengers or this flight attendant or anyone else. She had to save her sister herself. She had to do what no 12-year-old should ever have to do. She had to take matters into her own hands because the system designed to protect children had failed them completely. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Her father had made them promise to only call in real emergencies. Well, this was the realest emergency Kenya could imagine. Her twin was dying. And their father, Michael Thompson, was the only person she trusted to make this nightmare stop. But before she could dial, before she could make that call that would change everything, Susan the flight attendant appeared again. And her face was even colder than before. Put that phone away, Susan snapped. Electronic devices need to be in airplane mode. And if you keep disrupting this flight, I'm going to have to take more serious action. Kenya looked up at this woman, at this adult who saw a dying child and felt nothing but annoyance, and something hardened in her 12-year-old heart. She wasn't going to be polite anymore. She wasn't going to follow rules that were killing her sister. She was going to fight. My sister is dying, Kenya said, her voice stronger now despite her tears. And you're letting it happen. You're going to have to live with that. And she dialed her father's number while Susan Mitchell watched with contempt, having no idea that the 12-year-old girl she dismissed was about to bring down the full weight of federal aviation authority on her head. Having no idea that the dying child she'd refused to help was the daughter of the one man who could ground every plane in American airspace. The phone rang. And Kenya Thompson prayed her father would answer before it was too late. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Kenya's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Pick up, Daddy. Please pick up. Beside her, Kayla's breathing had become terrifyingly quiet, just shallow gasps that barely moved her chest. Her twin's eyes were half closed, her skin taking on a grayish tint that made Kenya want to scream. Then Susan's hand shot out and snatched the phone right out of Kenya's grip. I told you to put that away, Susan hissed, holding the phone above her head where Kenya couldn't reach it. You're being disruptive and disrespectful. This is your last warning before I have you both removed from this flight. Removed? Kenya stared at her in disbelief. We're at 37,000 feet. Where are you going to remove us to? And my sister can't even stand up. She can't breathe. How can you not see that? But Susan had already walked away, Kenya's phone clutched in her hand like a trophy. Like she'd won. Like she'd just solved a problem instead of sentencing a child to death. Kenya turned back to Kayla and felt her world tilting. Her sister's lips were almost completely blue now. Her fingernails looked black. Her chest was barely moving. The medical term flashed through Kenya's mind from the health class they'd taken together. Respiratory arrest. When the body stops being able to breathe on its own. When death comes in minutes without intervention. Kenya sobbed, cupping her sister's face in her hands. Kayla, please. You have to keep breathing. You have to fight. Mama and Daddy are going to fix this. I promise. Just hold on a little longer. Kayla's eyes opened slightly, unfocused and distant. She tried to speak but couldn't form words. Just a wheeze. Just the sound of airways completely blocked. Just the sound of dying. Help us, Kenya screamed, turning to face the passengers around them. All of you. Why are you just sitting there? My sister is dying. She needs oxygen. Someone has to have an inhaler. Someone has to do something. Please. I'm begging you. Help us. The businessman in row 22 looked away, shame written across his face but his body staying firmly in his seat. The young mother in row 21 had tears in her eyes but she just shook her head and held her toddler tighter. The college students behind them kept recording, their phones up, capturing every moment of Kenya's desperation and Kayla's suffering but not one of them moved to help. A white woman across the aisle finally spoke up, her voice uncertain. Maybe we should get the captain? This seems really serious. Susan appeared again, her professional smile looking more like a snarl now. Ma'am, I have the situation under control. These girls are being dramatic. If there was a real medical emergency, I would know it. I'm trained for this. But look at her, the woman protested weakly, gesturing at Kayla who was now slumped forward, held up only by her seatbelt. That child is blue. That's not dramatics. That's a medical emergency. I appreciate your concern, Susan said in a tone that made it clear she didn't appreciate it at all. But I'm asking you to trust my professional judgment and let me handle this. The woman opened her mouth like she might argue further. But then she looked at Susan's hard expression, at the authority in her stance, at the uniform that gave her power. And she backed down. Just like the businessman had backed down. Just like everyone on this plane kept backing down. Choosing not to make waves over saving a child's life. Kenya felt something inside her shatter. These people weren't going to help. The flight attendant wasn't going to help. They were alone. Completely alone. And Kayla was running out of time. She looked at her sister's chest and realized the breathing had changed. It wasn't just shallow anymore. It was agonal. Irregular gasps that came at long intervals. The kind of breathing that happened when the brain was shutting down, when the body was giving up, when death was minutes away. Medical professionals call it Shane Stokes breathing. Kenya didn't know the term but she knew what it meant. She'd seen it once when their grandmother was dying. Those same irregular gasps. That same terrible pause between breaths. That same horrible waiting to see if another breath would come. No, Kenya whispered, shaking Kayla harder. No. You don't get to die. You don't get to leave me. We're twins. We're supposed to do everything together. You can't do this without me. Kayla didn't respond. Didn't squeeze her hand back. Didn't open her eyes. Just kept taking those horrible irregular gasps that were getting further and further apart. Kenya turned to the aisle and saw Susan standing there, arms crossed, watching with cold detachment. And something broke free in Kenya. All the politeness her parents had taught her. All the respectability politics about staying calm and being the bigger person. All the rules about respecting authority. It all shattered in the face of watching her twin sister die while an adult with the power to help chose not to. You're killing her, Kenya screamed, her voice raw and broken. You're murdering my sister because you don't think black girls deserve help. Because you think we're lying. Because you think our lives don't matter. And everyone on this plane is letting you do it. The cabin went absolutely silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade. Every passenger heard those words. Every single person on that flight had to face what they were allowing to happen. What their silence was enabling. What their cowardice was permitting. Some of them looked away, unable to meet Kenya's eyes. Some of them cried quietly. Some of them gripped their armrests and stared straight ahead, trying to pretend they weren't complicit. But they were. They all were. 40 witnesses to medical neglect. 40 people who would have to live with the knowledge that they'd chosen their own comfort over a child's life. Susan's face flushed red. Lower your voice right now or I'm calling the captain to restrain you. Call him, Kenya shot back, tears and rage mixing in her voice. Call the captain. Call security. Call whoever you want. Because my sister is dying and I don't care about your rules anymore. I don't care about being polite. I don't care about anything except getting her help. She turned back to the passengers, her 12-year-old face twisted with grief and fury. All of you have phones. You're all recording this. You'll all post it on social media later and talk about how terrible it is. But right now, right here, when you could actually do something, you're just watching. You're letting this happen. And when my sister is dead, when my twin is gone, you're all going to have to live with knowing you could have saved her and you didn't. An older black man 3 rows back finally stood up. His face was grim, determined. He'd been silent until now, maybe hoping the flight attendant would come to her senses, maybe not wanting to be another angry black person making demands. But he couldn't stay silent anymore. I'm a retired he said, his voice carrying authority that made Susan pause. I've been watching this child for the past 15 minutes and she is in severe respiratory distress. Her oxygen saturation is critically low. She needs supplemental oxygen immediately and we need to divert this plane to the nearest airport. This is a life-threatening emergency. Susan's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. You're a medical professional? 30 years with Detroit Fire Department, he said. And that child has maybe 5 to 10 minutes before she goes into full respiratory arrest. After that, brain damage occurs in 4 minutes. Death in 10. So you need to get oxygen right now and you need to tell the captain we need an emergency landing. For a moment, Kenya felt hope surge. Finally, an adult with medical credentials. Someone Susan would have to listen to. Someone who could save Kayla. But Susan's face hardened again. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but airline policy requires that I assess the situation. I don't see evidence of a life-threatening emergency. These girls have been disruptive and attention-seeking. I believe this is a behavioral issue, not a medical one. The retired EMT stared at her in disbelief. That child is cyanotic. She's bradypneic. She's altered mental status. What more evidence do you need? Are you going to wait until she's in cardiac arrest? I'm going to ask you to sit down, sir, Susan said coldly, or I'll have you removed from this flight as well. The man's hands clenched into fists, but he sat down slowly, his face a mask of fury and frustration. Even he couldn't override the flight attendant's authority. Even his medical expertise meant nothing in the face of Susan's determination to be right, to maintain control, to refuse to admit she'd made a deadly mistake. Kenya watched hope die again. Even with a medical professional speaking up, even with obvious evidence of emergency, the flight attendant wasn't going to help. She was going to let Kayla die rather than admit she'd been wrong. Rather than face the possibility that she'd let her racism override her training. Rather than acknowledge that 2 black girls deserved the same emergency response any white child would have received without question. Kayla's breathing stopped. Just stopped. For 5 seconds that felt like eternity, there was no sound, no movement, no rise and fall of her chest. Then a gasping breath. Agonal. Dying. Then another pause. Longer this time. Kenya grabbed her sister and shook her hard. Breathe, Kayla. Breathe. Don't you dare give up. Another gasp. This one weaker. Kenya looked up at Susan through tears that blurred her vision. Please, she whispered, all her fight draining away, leaving only grief. Please help my sister. I'll do anything. I'll apologize for yelling. I'll sit quietly. I'll never ask for anything again. Just please save her. Please. She's my twin. She's my best friend. She's my whole world. Please don't let her die. And Susan Mitchell looked down at this 12-year-old black girl begging for her sister's life and said 5 words that would haunt everyone who heard them. You should have thought about that before causing a scene. Then she walked away. Left Kenya holding her dying sister. Left 40 passengers sitting in shocked silence. Left a retired EMT with his head in his hands. Left a legacy of cruelty and racism that would end her career and change an industry. But in that moment, all Kenya knew was that Kayla had stopped breathing again. And this time, the pause stretched on. 5 seconds. 10. 15. No breath came. Kenya's scream tore through the cabin like a siren. A sound no 12-year-old should ever make. The sound of a child watching her twin die. Primal. Devastating. She's not breathing, Kenya shrieked, shaking Kayla violently. She's not breathing. Somebody help me. Please. Somebody do something. The retired EMT was out of his seat instantly, pushing past Susan who tried to block him. Get out of my way, he growled, his professional demeanor replaced by barely controlled rage. That child is in cardiac arrest. He reached Kayla and immediately tilted her head back, checking for airway obstruction. Her lips were completely blue now, almost purple. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that meant oxygen had been absent from her tissues for too long. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. She's got a pulse but it's weak and thready, he said, his voice tight with urgency. Respiratory arrest but not cardiac yet. We have maybe 2 minutes before her heart stops. I need that oxygen now. Not in 5 minutes. Not after you check your protocols. Right now or this child dies. Susan stood frozen, her face pale, finally understanding that this was real. That she'd been wrong. That her suspicion and her racism and her stubborn refusal to admit error had brought them to this moment. A child dying. A lawsuit. A career ending. A life she'd have to live knowing she'd killed someone. The oxygen, the EMT roared. Where is it? Susan stumbled toward the galley, her hands shaking. Other flight attendants appeared, confusion and horror written across their faces. The young male attendant who'd been kind earlier took one look at Kayla and went white. Oh my God, he whispered. Why didn't someone call for medical help? Why didn't someone tell us it was this bad? We tried, Kenya sobbed. We begged. She wouldn't listen. She said we were faking. She took my phone. She wouldn't help us. The male attendant grabbed the portable oxygen unit from the emergency medical kit, his hands fumbling with equipment he'd been trained to use but had never actually needed in a real crisis. The retired EMT snatched it from him, placed the mask over Kayla's face, and turned the valve to maximum flow. Come on, baby girl, he murmured, watching Kayla's chest for any sign of spontaneous breathing. Come on back. You've got people who need you. Seconds ticked by. Kayla remained still. Unresponsive. The oxygen flowing over her face but not getting into lungs that had stopped working. Her body limp. Her skin gray. Her twin sisters sobbing beside her with a grief so profound it made grown adults look away. Kenya grabbed Kayla's hand and felt how cold it was. How lifeless. She put her face close to her sister's, their identical features separated now by the chasm between living and dying. Kayla, she whispered desperately. Remember when we were 6 and you fell off the swing? Remember how I stayed with you until Mama came? I'm staying with you now. I'm right here. You're not alone. You're never alone. We're twins. We're connected. You have to come back to me. Please. Please come back. A black woman from row 26 appeared suddenly, kneeling beside Kenya. Her name was Gloria Hayes, a grandmother of 5, a retired nurse who'd been sitting too far back to see what was happening until Kenya's screams had cut through her headphones. Now she saw the situation and her professional training kicked in immediately. Baby, let me help, Gloria said gently to Kenya, her voice calm despite the chaos. I'm a nurse. I'm going to stay right here with you and your sister. You're not alone anymore. She looked at the EMT. What do we have? 12-year-old female. Severe asthmatic. Both inhalers empty. Flight attendant refused oxygen for approximately 25 minutes. She's been in respiratory arrest for about 90 seconds. Pulse is present but weakening. Gloria's face hardened with fury but her voice stayed steady. We need to bag her. Where's the emergency medical kit? The male flight attendant brought it over, his hands shaking. Gloria pulled out the bag valve mask and began manually ventilating Kayla, squeezing the bag in rhythm, forcing oxygen into lungs that couldn't work on their own. Around them, the cabin had descended into chaos. Passengers were crying openly. The businessman who'd stayed silent was on his phone frantically texting someone. The young mother was holding her toddler and weeping. The college students had finally stopped recording, their faces stricken with guilt and horror at what they'd documented. What they'd allowed. We need to divert, the male flight attendant said, pulling out the phone to call the cockpit. "We need an emergency landing right now." But even as he made the call, even as the captain began coordinating with air traffic control to find the nearest airport, everyone in that cabin knew the truth. They were still 35 minutes from the closest runway. 35 minutes from paramedics and hospitals and equipment that could actually save a life. 35 minutes that Kayla Thompson might not have. Gloria kept bagging, kept forcing air into Kayla's lungs, her experienced hands working steadily while her heart broke for this child and her terrified sister. She'd seen medical racism before. Had experienced it herself. Had watched black patients' pain be dismissed, their symptoms be questioned, their emergencies be deprioritized. But this? A child being denied oxygen until she stopped breathing? This was a new level of cruelty. "Kenya," Gloria said softly while continuing to ventilate Kayla. "Tell me about your sister. Tell me who she is." Sometimes they can hear us even when they can't respond. So Kenya talked. Through her tears and her terror, she painted a picture of Kayla Thompson. Kayla who loved science and wanted to be a doctor. Kayla who couldn't sing but hummed constantly anyway. Kayla who always shared her snacks even when Kenya had eaten all of hers. Kayla who was brave and funny and kind and didn't deserve this. Didn't deserve to be judged by her skin color instead of her character. Didn't deserve to have her medical emergency dismissed as dramatics. Didn't deserve to die at 12 because racism was more powerful than compassion. The passengers listened to Kenya's words and felt their guilt multiply. They'd seen this child. They'd heard her begging. They'd watched her sister dying. And they'd done nothing. Recorded but not rescued. Witnessed but not intervened. Chosen the comfort of staying seated over the courage of standing up. A woman in row 25 was openly sobbing now. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying to no one. "I'm so sorry. I should have done something. I should have helped. But sorry changed nothing. Sorry didn't put oxygen in Kayla's lungs 15 minutes ago when it would have prevented this. Sorry didn't override a flight attendant's deadly decision. Sorry was just a word people used when they realized their silence had consequences." Susan stood in the galley, watching the scene unfold, her face ashen. She'd disappeared when the retired EMT had taken over, retreating to avoid accountability, avoid facing what she'd done. But she couldn't hide forever. Couldn't escape the reality that her actions, her refusal, her racism had brought them to this moment. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making an emergency landing at Des Moines International Airport. We'll be on the ground in approximately 8 minutes. Paramedics will be standing by. Please remain seated and keep the aisles clear. 8 minutes." Kenya looked at her sister's gray face, at Gloria's hands squeezing the bag that was breathing for Kayla, at the oxygen mask that was supposed to be saving her but might be too late. 8 more minutes of not knowing. 8 more minutes of watching. 8 more minutes of praying. The EMT checked Kayla's pulse again and his expression flickered with something. "Her pulse is getting slightly stronger," he said carefully. "The manual ventilation and oxygen are helping. But she's still not breathing on her own. Her body is too exhausted. We need that ambulance." Gloria kept bagging, her rhythm steady and sure. 28 breaths per minute. The rate for a child in respiratory distress. Her arms were getting tired but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This child's life depended on her not stopping. "Sweetie," Gloria said to Kenya between squeezes of the bag. "Do you have family meeting you in Denver? Someone we can call?" "My Aunt Rebecca," Kenya said, her voice breaking. "She was supposed to pick us up. We were going to spend Christmas with her. We were going to go skiing and drink hot chocolate and open presents. Now Kayla might die and it's all because that woman wouldn't help us." Gloria's jaw tightened but her hands stayed steady. "Baby, I need you to listen to me. Your sister is a fighter. She's still here. She's still fighting. And we're going to fight with her. But I also need you to be strong. When we land, there are going to be paramedics and doctors and lots of scary equipment. Your sister is going to need you to be brave. Can you do that?" Kenya nodded, wiping tears from her face. "I can be brave. I was brave when I tried to protect her. I was brave when I asked for help. I can keep being brave." "That's my girl," Gloria said. "And honey, do you have your parents' phone numbers?" We need to call them. They need to know what happened. The flight attendant took my phone, Kenya said bitterly. She took it when I tried to call my daddy. She said I was being disruptive. Gloria's expression turned thunderous. She looked at the male flight attendant hovering nearby. Get this child's phone back right now. Her parents need to know their daughter is in respiratory failure. And if that woman gives you any trouble, you tell her a federal lawsuit is the least of her problems. The young attendant rushed off and returned moments later with Kenya's phone, retrieved from where Susan had stashed it in the galley. Kenya grabbed it with shaking hands but then froze. What if Daddy doesn't answer? What if I can't get through? What if Kayla dies before I can tell him what happened? Gloria squeezed Kenya's shoulder with her free hand while continuing to bag Kayla with the other. Your daddy will answer. Parents always answer when their children call. And your sister is not going to die. Not on my watch. Now you call your father and you tell him everything. Every single thing that happened. Because someone needs to hold these people accountable. The plane began its descent. Rapid. Emergency. The kind of descent that made ears pop and stomachs drop and everyone grabbed their armrests. But Kenya didn't care about any of that. She just looked at her phone, at her father's number in her contacts, and prepared to make the call that would change everything. Gloria kept bagging. The EMT kept monitoring Kayla's weak pulse. And Kayla Thompson, 12 years old and traumatized and terrified, dialed her father's number with hands that shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. Please answer, she whispered. Please, Daddy. Please pick up. The phone rang. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., Michael Thompson looked at his phone and saw his daughter's name. He had no idea that his entire world was about to shatter. That the little girl who'd kissed him goodbye that morning was fighting for her life because racism had decided she wasn't worth saving. He answered. And Kenya's broken voice said the words no father should ever hear. Daddy, Kayla's dying and nobody would help us. Michael Thompson was reviewing aviation safety reports when his daughter's voice shattered his world. The professional composure he'd maintained through 20 years in federal service crumbled in an instant. What? Kenya, what do you mean dying? Where are you? What's happening? We're on the plane, Kenya sobbed, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. United Flight 2156. Kayla had an asthma attack and her inhalers were empty and I asked the flight attendant for oxygen and she said no. She said we were faking. She said we were being dramatic. I begged so many times and she wouldn't help and Kayla stopped breathing and nobody would help us and there's a nurse lady helping now but I don't know if Kayla's going to make it and I'm so scared. Michael's vision tunneled. His baby. Is Kayla. Not breathing. He forced himself to stay calm, to be the father his daughters needed even as panic clawed at his chest. Baby girl, listen to me. Is Kayla breathing now? Is someone helping her right now? A nice lady named Gloria is breathing for her with a bag thing, Kenya said. And there's a man who used to be an EMT. They're helping. But Daddy, she was without oxygen for so long. Her lips were blue. She wasn't moving. What if her brain is damaged? What if she never wakes up? A woman's voice came on the line. Calm, professional, carrying the weight of experience. Mr. Thompson? This is Gloria Hayes. I'm a retired RN. Your daughter is in critical condition but we've got her stabilized for now. We're making an emergency landing in Des Moines in about 6 minutes. She needs a hospital immediately. What's her status? Michael asked, his FAA training kicking in even through his terror. Respiratory arrest for approximately 2 minutes before we got oxygen to her. I'm manually ventilating. Pulse is weak but present. She's unconscious and unresponsive. Sir, I need you to know this was completely preventable. Your daughters asked for help repeatedly and were refused. For over 20 minutes. This is medical negligence. Michael's hand tightened on his phone so hard the case cracked. Refused? I need a name. Flight attendant named Susan Mitchell. And sir, there were at least 40 passengers who watched this happen and did nothing. Your daughter begged them for help. They recorded her on their phones but nobody intervened until it was almost too late. Michael was already moving, grabbing his coat, his briefcase, his credentials. Put Kenya back on. Kenya's tearful voice returned. I tried so hard to save her. I did everything you and Mama taught us. I asked politely. I explained about the asthma. I told them she needed help. But they wouldn't listen. And now Kayla might die and it's my fault for not fighting harder. No, Michael said fiercely. Baby girl, you hear me? This is not your fault. You did everything right. You fought for your sister. You got help. You called me. You are the bravest person on that plane. What happened to Kayla is the fault of adults who failed you. The flight attendant who refused to help. The passengers who stayed silent. The system that didn't protect you. But not you. Never you. Through the phone, Michael heard the landing gear deploy. Heard Gloria's steady voice counting breaths. Heard his daughter's quiet crying. Heard the sounds of his world falling apart. Is the plane still at the gate? Are you still on the ground in Des Moines? He asked urgently. We're landing right now, Kenya said. I can see ambulances outside. Kenya, I need you to stay with your sister. Don't leave her side. The paramedics are going to take care of her. And baby girl, I'm getting on a plane right now. I'll be there in 3 hours. You tell Kayla that daddy's coming. You tell her to fight. You tell her we love her. The wheels touched down with a heavy thump. Kenya, I have to go, Michael said. The paramedics need to work. But daddy's handling this. That flight attendant. Those passengers. United Airlines. They're all going to answer for what they did to you and your sister. He hung up and immediately dialed the FAA administrator's direct line. When she answered, Michael's voice was deadly calm. Janet, this is Michael Thompson. I need you to ground United Flight 2156 in Des Moines immediately. Nobody leaves that aircraft. A flight attendant on that plane refused emergency medical oxygen to my 12-year-old daughter during a severe asthma attack. She stopped breathing. She may have brain damage. I want that plane treated as a crime scene and I want federal investigators there within the hour. There was a sharp intake of breath. Michael, oh my God. Is your daughter alive? For now. But I don't know for how long. And I don't know what condition she'll be in if she wakes up. Ground that plane. Detain that crew. And clear my schedule. I'm prosecuting this personally. Consider it done. Michael, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't help my daughter breathe, Michael said. Justice will. He ended the call and stood in his office. This man who'd dedicated his career to aviation safety, who'd written policies to protect passengers, who'd believed the system worked. And he realized that all his power, all his authority, all his position hadn't protected his daughters from the racism that infected every corner of American life. But that power would get them justice. And he was going to use every ounce of it to make sure United Airlines and Susan Mitchell paid for every second his daughters had suffered. The war had begun. And Michael Thompson was going to burn down anyone who stood in his way. Michael Thompson's second call went directly to United Airlines corporate headquarters. He didn't go through customer service. Didn't follow normal complaint procedures. He used his FAA director credentials to reach the CEO's emergency line. James Patterson answered within 30 seconds, already briefed that a federal official was calling. Mr. Patterson, this is Michael Thompson, Director of Aviation Safety with the FAA. 23 minutes ago, one of your flight attendants named Susan Mitchell refused emergency medical oxygen to my 12-year-old daughter during a life-threatening asthma attack. My daughter stopped breathing. She's currently being manually ventilated by a retired nurse on your flight 2156. She may have permanent brain damage. And I'm calling to inform you that your airline is now under federal investigation. Patterson's corporate training kicked in immediately. Mr. Thompson, I'm deeply concerned about your daughter. We'll launch an immediate internal review and the employee will be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That's not adequate, Michael cut him off, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. Here's what's going to happen. You have 47 passenger videos showing your employee refusing oxygen to a dying child. You have a retired EMT who begged her to help. You have my daughter's medical records that will show oxygen deprivation for over 20 minutes. So when I tell you to ground your fleet for emergency medical protocol review, you're going to do it. When I tell you Susan Mitchell is terminated immediately, you're going to do it. And when I tell you that United Airlines is going to face the largest discrimination lawsuit in aviation history, you're going to believe it. Sir, with respect, we have procedures. We can't just ground our entire operation. Michael's voice went ice cold. Mr. Patterson, as Director of Aviation Safety, I have the authority to revoke United's operating certificate if I determine there's a systematic safety violation. Refusing emergency medical care to a child because of implicit racial bias constitutes such a violation. So you have two choices. Ground your flights voluntarily for immediate crew retraining, or I ground them for you and it stays on your safety record permanently. Which would you prefer? The line went silent for 5 long seconds. How many flights? Patterson asked quietly, defeated. Every single one currently in the air. Every captain gets briefed on this incident within 15 minutes. Every crew member undergoes emergency medical protocol review before their next shift. And Susan Mitchell never works in aviation again. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Mr. Thompson. I'll issue the order immediately. And sir, for what it's worth, I am genuinely sorry about your daughter. Sorry doesn't breathe for her, Michael said coldly. Justice will. He hung up and made his third call. This one to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. A prosecutor he'd worked with on previous aviation cases answered. David, it's Michael Thompson. I need you to open a federal civil rights investigation. My daughter was denied emergency medical treatment on a commercial flight. The flight attendant refused oxygen during a severe asthma attack. Race was clearly a factor. I'm sending you everything within the hour. Jesus, Michael. Is your daughter okay? She's alive. That's all I know right now. But I want criminal charges. Negligent endangerment at minimum. Civil rights violations. And I want every passenger who recorded and didn't intervene identified and interviewed. Their silence enabled this. You've got it. I'll have agents in Des Moines within 2 hours. Michael ended the call and looked at his phone. 3 calls. 3 minutes. And he'd set in motion a federal response that would reshape airline medical protocols across the country. But it didn't feel like enough. Wouldn't feel like enough until he saw his daughter breathing on her own. Until he knew her brain was intact. Until he could hold both his girls and promise them this would never happen again. His assistant appeared in the doorway. Sir, your car is ready. And I've arranged a government jet to Des Moines. Wheels up in 20 minutes. Michael grabbed his coat and briefcase. One more call. To his wife. The call he'd been dreading. The call that would break Sandra's heart the same way his had been broken. He dialed as he walked to the elevator. She answered on the first ring, hearing something in his tone even before he spoke. Michael? What's wrong? It's Kayla, he said, his voice finally breaking. Baby, you need to get to Des Moines. Our daughter stopped breathing on the plane. They wouldn't help her, Sandra. They refused oxygen and she stopped breathing and I don't know if she's going to be okay. Sandra's scream echoed through the phone. A nurse who'd seen countless tragedies, who'd stayed professional through crisis after crisis, shattered completely when it was her own child. Michael listened to his wife sob and felt his rage crystallize into something absolute. I'm handling it, he told her. Everyone who failed our daughters is going to pay. I promise you that. But right now we need to get to Iowa. Can you get a flight? I'm leaving the hospital right now, Sandra said through tears. I'll be there as fast as I can. Michael, she has to be okay. She has to be. She's a fighter, Michael said, trying to believe his own words. She's our daughter. She's going to fight. But as he climbed into the car heading to the airport, as he thought about Kayla's blue lips and stopped breathing and the minutes of oxygen deprivation that might have stolen parts of her mind, Michael Thompson made a vow. Susan Mitchell would go to prison. United Airlines would pay hundreds of millions. And every single passenger who'd recorded his daughter dying would have to face what their silence had cost. The reckoning was coming. And it would be absolutely devastating. Within 17 minutes of Michael Thompson's call, something unprecedented happened in American aviation. United Airlines issued an emergency order grounding every flight in their network. Pilots mid-flight received direct communication from corporate headquarters. Planes at gates were held. Departures were canceled. Over 400 flights. 70,000 passengers. The entire operation stopped. CNN breaking news flashed across screens nationwide. United Airlines grounds entire fleet following alleged medical emergency discrimination incident. In Des Moines, Flight 2156 sat on the tarmac surrounded by emergency vehicles. Paramedics rushed aboard before the seatbelt sign even turned off. They found Gloria Hayes still manually ventilating Kayla, her arms exhausted but her rhythm never faltering. The retired EMT stood beside her, monitoring the weak pulse that was all that stood between Kayla Thompson and death. "We've got her," the lead paramedic said gently, taking over the bag valve mask. "You did good. You saved her life." But Gloria's face showed no relief. "Did I?" She looked at Kayla's gray pallor, her unresponsive state, her body that had been without adequate oxygen for nearly 30 minutes. "Or did I just delay the inevitable?" They loaded Kayla onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. For lines. Monitors. Oxygen saturation reading a terrifying 71% despite the supplemental oxygen. Kenya tried to follow, but a paramedic stopped her gently. "Honey, we need space to work. You can ride in the ambulance with us, but we need you to stay back while we stabilize her." Kenya nodded numbly, watching strangers surround her twin with equipment and urgency. Gloria stayed beside her, this woman who'd appeared like an angel when Kenya needed her most. Back on the plane, federal aviation investigators were already boarding. FAA badges. Grim expressions. Recording devices. They cordoned off rows 22 through 26. Began photographing the scene. Started collecting passenger phones for evidence. "Nobody leaves this aircraft," the lead investigator announced. "We need statements from everyone. This is now a federal investigation into medical negligence and potential civil rights violations." Susan Mitchell sat in her jump seat, her face buried in her hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. Around her, 40 passengers who'd recorded but not rescued exchanged guilty glances. They'd thought they were just witnesses to a drama. Now they were evidence in a federal case. Complicit in a crime they'd watched unfold and done nothing to stop. The ambulance carrying Kayla screamed away from the airport, sirens wailing. Inside, paramedics worked frantically. Intubation. Medications. Desperate attempts to save a 12-year-old girl whose only crime had been being black in a space where her suffering wasn't believed. Kenya held Gloria's hand in the back of the ambulance, watching her sister surrounded by strangers fighting for her life. And she whispered the prayer she'd been repeating since the nightmare began. "Please don't let her die. Please don't let my sister die." The paramedic checking Kayla's vitals looked up with grave concern. "We're losing her pressure. She's crashing. Driver, faster. We need that hospital now." The ambulance accelerated through Des Moines streets, racing against time, racing against oxygen deprivation, racing against the damage that racism and negligence had already done. At Des Moines Mercy Hospital, a pediatric trauma team assembled. They'd been briefed. 12-year-old black female. Severe asthmatic. Denied medical care for extended period. Respiratory arrest. Possible anoxic brain injury. They prepared the ICU. Called in specialists. Readied equipment for the worst-case scenario. Because everyone knew the statistics. The longer the brain goes without oxygen, the more permanent the damage. And Kayla Thompson had been without adequate oxygen for far too long. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay. Doctors and nurses surrounded the stretcher before it even stopped moving. They rushed Kayla inside, Kenya running behind them, Gloria still holding her hand, both of them crying and praying and hoping against hope that somehow, impossibly, Kayla would survive this. A nurse stopped Kenya at the trauma room doors. "Sweetie, you can't come in. We need space to work. There's a waiting room right here where you can sit. We'll update you as soon as we know anything." Kenya watched the doors close, separating her from her twin for the first time in their lives. And she collapsed into Gloria's arms, this stranger who'd become a lifeline, and sobbed with a grief and terror no 12-year-old should ever have to feel. In the trauma room, doctors worked with controlled urgency. Intubation confirmed. Ventilator settings adjusted. Blood gases checked. CT scan ordered to assess brain damage. For medications to protect what brain function remained. A team of specialists doing everything medical science could offer. But they all knew the harsh truth. They could treat the symptoms. Support the body. Give Kayla the best chance possible. But if the oxygen deprivation had lasted too long, if too many brain cells had died, if the damage was too severe, all their expertise wouldn't be enough. Kayla Thompson's fate had been sealed the moment Susan Mitchell decided a black girl's medical emergency wasn't worth believing. Now they could only wait and see how much that decision had cost. And 3 hours away, Michael Thompson sat on a government jet, unable to do anything but pray that when he arrived, his daughter would still be alive to hold. Michael Thompson burst through the emergency room doors 3 hours and 12 minutes after Kenya's call. He'd broken every speed record getting from DC to Iowa. His eyes were wild, searching, desperate. Then he saw Kenya in the waiting room, curled against Gloria Hayes, both of them exhausted and tear-stained. "Daddy?" Kenya sobbed, launching herself into his arms. "She's still not awake. They did a brain scan. They won't tell me anything because I'm just a kid. Daddy, is Kayla going to die?" Michael held his daughter while his heart shattered into pieces. A doctor approached, her expression carefully neutral in that way medical professionals had when the news wasn't good. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Dr. Sarah Chin, pediatric intensive care. Your daughter is stable but critical. We have her on a ventilator. The CT scan shows cerebral edema, swelling of the brain from oxygen deprivation. The next 48 hours are critical. Can I see her?" Dr. Chin led them to the ICU. Michael stopped at the doorway, completely unprepared. His baby girl was surrounded by machines, tubes coming out of her, her face swollen and gray. He walked to her bedside on legs that barely held him and took her small hand in his. "Daddy's here, Kayla Bear," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there to protect you. But I'm here now. And everyone who hurt you is going to pay." Sandra arrived an hour later, having caught the first available flight. She took one look at her daughter and collapsed beside the bed, a nurse holding her unconscious child, sobbing prayers and apologies. Michael stepped into the hallway and made a call to his attorney. "File criminal charges against Susan Mitchell. Negligent endangerment. Reckless child endangerment. And file a federal civil rights lawsuit against United Airlines. For $100 million. For $100 million? They nearly killed my daughter because she was black. That's just the beginning." Within days, Susan Mitchell was arrested at her home, led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured everything. Federal prosecutors announced charges that carried up to 15 years in prison. United Airlines stock plummeted. Their CEO resigned under pressure. The FAA investigation revealed a pattern of dismissed medical emergencies involving passengers of color. 6 months later, Susan Mitchell stood in federal court for sentencing. The judge, reviewing the evidence including 47 passenger videos, looked at her with undisguised contempt. "You had multiple opportunities to save a child's life. Instead, you let your racial bias override your training and your humanity. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison for civil rights violations and reckless endangerment of a minor." The courtroom erupted. Civil rights activists cheered. Michael Thompson sat stoic, his arm around Kenya, knowing no sentence could undo what had been done. United Airlines settled the civil lawsuit for $520 million, the largest discrimination settlement in aviation history. The money would cover Kayla's lifetime medical care, therapy for both twins, and establish a foundation to combat medical racism. But money couldn't buy back what was lost. Kayla woke up after 5 days with permanent lung damage and mild cognitive impairment. She'd never breathe easily again. Her dreams of becoming a doctor shifted to becoming an advocate, her brain damage making medical school impossible. Kenya developed severe PTSD, waking up screaming from nightmares where she watched her sister die over and over while people recorded and did nothing. The 40 passengers who'd stayed silent were publicly identified. Some lost jobs. Some faced social media backlash. Most just lived quietly with the guilt of knowing they'd watched a child nearly die and chosen comfort over courage. Justice had been served. Susan Mitchell was in prison. United had paid. Policies had changed across the industry. But the Thompson twins would carry their scars forever. And that was the imperfect reality of justice that came too late to prevent the trauma. Kayla Thompson is 15 now. She carries 3 inhalers everywhere, Her damaged lungs a constant reminder of 28 minutes when racism decided she wasn't worth saving. She gets winded walking upstairs. Running makes her dizzy. The cognitive impairment means she processes information slower than she used to, her sharp mind dulled by oxygen starvation that should never have happened. Kenya still can't fly. Can't be in enclosed spaces without panic attacks. Therapy 3 times a week helps but doesn't erase the trauma of watching her twin die while 40 adults looked away. She's studying law now, determined to fight for children whose pain gets dismissed because of their skin color. The twins are inseparable still, but their bond is threaded with trauma as much as love. They survived, but they were forever changed. Susan Mitchell served 9 years before being released. Her nursing credentials were revoked. Her name synonymous with medical racism. Some say justice was served. Others say 12 years wasn't enough for nearly killing a child through willful negligence. United Airlines implemented industry-wide changes. Mandatory implicit bias training. Zero tolerance for discrimination. New protocols requiring immediate medical response. And those 40 passengers? Most moved on. Posted the videos. Told the story at parties. Made themselves witnesses without acknowledging they were accomplices. A few changed, becoming advocates who speak up now. But most just forgot. Went back to their lives. Convinced themselves it wasn't their responsibility. If this story devastated you, answer honestly, what would you have done? Would you have stood up to Susan Mitchell? Demanded oxygen for a dying child? Or would you have been passenger 41, recording while someone suffocated? Like if you think black children deserve emergency care without question. Subscribe if you believe medical racism kills. Share with someone who needs to understand that silence isn't neutrality, it's choosing the oppressor's side. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your story of medical discrimination. Tell us if this changed you. Because there will be another Kayla. Another black child whose symptoms get dismissed. Another emergency where race determines who gets help. Kayla survived because her father had power. Because he could ground airlines and file federal charges. But what about black children whose parents don't work for the FAA? Who don't have resources to fight? Who suffer in silence because the system wasn't designed to protect them? The $520 million settlement created the Thompson Medical Justice Foundation. They train healthcare workers to recognize bias. They provide legal support for discrimination cases. They lobby for policy protecting vulnerable patients. Kayla's suffering sparked change. But change shouldn't require a child nearly dying. Don't just watch and feel sad. Do something. Be different. Be the person who intervenes. Be the voice that demands help. Be the courage that saves lives instead of the silence that enables death. Next time you see someone dismissed, someone suffering, someone begging for help while authority refuses, remember Kayla Thompson. Remember her blue lips. Remember her stopped breathing. Remember her twins' desperate screams that 40 people ignored. And choose courage. Choose action. Choose to stand up even when it's uncomfortable, even when everyone else sits down. Because the next child who can't breathe might not have a father who can ground planes. They might only have you. And that has to be enough. This is Hyper Racism Channel. We expose institutional racism. We amplify silenced voices. We fight for children who deserve better than a world where skin color determines whether they receive life-saving care. Kayla survived with permanent damage. Kenya survived with permanent trauma. Susan Mitchell is in prison. United paid millions. Policies changed. But none of it erases those 28 minutes of suffering. Don't let their trauma be meaningless. Learn from it. Change from it. Become the person who ensures the next Kayla doesn't have to beg 40 people before someone helps. Thank you for watching. Now go be the change. Hit that notification bell. Stay vigilant. Stay compassionate. Never stay silent. Because silence isn't neutrality. Silence is violence. And we refuse to be silent anymore.